The mocking, the great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for nearly a mile in every direction. And Ambassador Chen Wei had never felt smaller in her entire life. She stood at the center of a circular platform that floated above a pit of swirling blue energy. And around her rose the seats of the 12 most powerful species in the known galaxy. The Valkyrie delegation sat to her left, their bodies made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows across the walls, and they had existed as a species for over 2 billion years before Earth even formed. To her right, the Kreth Empire's representatives clicked their massive claws together in what she had been told was a sign of impatience, and their warships numbered in the millions across 10,000 star systems behind her. The Syndicate of Oz watched with eyes that never blinked, and the historical records showed they had erased 17 species from existence for crimes as small as refusing trade agreements. Chen Wei took a deep breath and stepped forward to the speaking platform. Honored members of the Council of 12 Stars, she began, and her voice echoed through the chamber. I come before you as the representative of Earth and all humanity, and we humbly request consideration for membership in the Galactic Concord. For a long moment, there was silence. Then High Arbiter Vashthul, the ancient insectoid who had led the council for 3,000 years, leaned forward in his seat, and his 4 mandibles clicked together in a sound that Chen Wei's translator rendered as laughter. You wish to join us, he said, and his voice was thick with amusement. You, the humans, wish to sit among the elder races of the galaxy. The Valkyrie Collective spoke next, their crystalline voices harmonizing into a single tone that rang through the chamber like a bell. We have observed your world for many of your centuries, human, and we have seen what you are. Chen Wei felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her face calm and professional. And what have you seen? Honored Valkyrie. The crystal beings pulsed with inner light as they responded. We have seen a species that cannot stop fighting itself. And we have seen you burn your own cities and poison your own air and slaughter your own kind by the millions. And we have watched you come within moments of destroying your entire planet with nuclear fire, not once, but several times. The Kreth representative slammed one massive claw against the armrest of his seat. Your soldiers still use chemical propellant weapons. He growled, and his translator gave his words a tone of disgust. Your armor is made of fabric and polymer, and your ships are held together with bolts and welding. And you have no hive mind coordination and no psionic warfare capabilities. And no planetary shields. High Arbiter Vashthul raised one of his 4 arms to quiet the chamber. Tell me, human ambassador, how many of your kind have you killed in wars against each other? Chen Wei hesitated before answering. The exact number is difficult to calculate, High Arbiter, but estimates suggest that throughout human history, approximately 1 billion humans have died in conflicts with other humans. The chamber erupted in sounds that her translator struggled to process. But the meaning was clear enough without translation. They were laughing at her. They were laughing at humanity. The Syndicate of Oz spoke for the first time, their voice like dry leaves scraping across stone. 1 billion of your own kind. And yet, you come here seeking to join civilizations that have not known internal conflict for longer than your species has existed. Chen Wei felt heat rising in her cheeks, but she forced herself to remain composed. We have learned from our past, she said, and she was proud that her voice did not shake. Earth is united now, and we have not had a major conflict among ourselves for nearly 300 years. 300 years? Vashthul repeated, and his mandibles clicked with fresh amusement. The Valkyrie have been at peace for 2 billion years. And the Kreth Empire has maintained internal order for 800 million, and you speak of 300 years as if it were an accomplishment. He leaned back in his seat and gestured to the other council members. Shall we vote on the human application? The vote took less than 30 seconds, 12 against, 0 in favor. Your application is denied, Vashthul announced. And he did not bother to hide his contempt. Earth is hereby designated as a protected nature preserve under Concord law, which means no member species may interfere with your development. But it also means you are not recognized as a civilization worthy of galactic participation. Chen Wei felt the words like a physical blow. A nature preserve. She repeated quietly. It is a kindness, the Volturi collective chimed. We grant the same status to worlds populated by interesting animals. And you should be grateful, for it means you will be left alone to continue your primitive existence without interference. The Kreth representative made a sound that might have been a snort. Perhaps in another 1,000,000 years your descendants might evolve into something worth talking to. More laughter filled the chamber, and Chen Wei stood alone at the center of it all, surrounded by beings who saw her and her entire species as nothing more than clever animals playing with fire. She wanted to argue, wanted to defend humanity's achievements and potential, but she knew it would accomplish nothing. These beings had made up their minds long before she ever set foot in this chamber. I understand, she said finally, and her voice was flat and controlled. I will return to Earth and deliver your decision to my people. High Arbiter Vashthol waved one hand dismissively. To give them our regards, and perhaps suggest they focus on not destroying themselves for another few millennia before bothering us again. Chen Wei turned and walked from the chamber with her head held high, and she did not look back as the door sealed behind her. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks, and she spent most of that time alone in her cabin, watching the recording of the council session over and over again when her ship finally entered Earth's solar system. She transmitted the footage ahead to the unified government by the time she landed. Every leader on the planet had seen it, and every major news network was broadcasting clips of alien delegates laughing at humanity's application. Chen Wei expected outrage, expected protests and demands for action. What she found instead was something quieter and far more dangerous. She found silence. The entire planet had gone quiet, and in that silence, something old and patient and very, very angry had begun to wake up. No one on Earth laughed back at the aliens. They simply watched and listened and remembered, and they began to prepare. The invasion 18 months after Ambassador Chen Wei returned from the Galactic Concord. The skies above Earth turned dark with alien ships. The HFY Dominion had not existed when the elder races first rose to power, and they were considered newcomers to the galactic stage, having achieved spaceflight only 40 million years ago. But what they lacked in history, they made up for in ambition and cruelty. Supreme Commander Rethax stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Conquest, and watched the blue and green world spinning slowly beneath his fleet. 200 warships had followed him across the void, each one capable of reducing a continent to glass. And he had brought them all to claim this single primitive planet. The Galactic Concord had designated Earth as a nature preserve. But the HFY had never joined the Concord and cared nothing for their laws to Rethax. Earth represented an opportunity too perfect to ignore a young species with no allies and no defenses and no experience with real warfare would make the ideal first conquest for his rise to power within the Dominion. He AKTIVATE did the communication array and broadcast his message across every frequency the humans used, people of Earth. His voice boomed across the planet, translated into every human language simultaneously. I am Supreme Commander Rethax of the HFY Dominion, and your world now belongs to us. He paused to let the words sink in before continuing. You have one standard rotation to surrender unconditionally, and if you comply, you will be permitted to live as servants of the Dominion. But if you resist, I will begin the systematic destruction of your cities until nothing remains but ash and memory. Rethax leaned back in his command chair and waited for the terrified response he knew would come. Every species reacted the same way when faced with overwhelming force. and the humans would beg and plead and eventually submit. Just as dozens of other worlds had done before them, the response came 12 minutes later, transmitted from a facility somewhere in the northern regions of the largest continent. It was not a video message or a diplomatic communication. It was a simple text transmission containing only a few words. We do not surrender, and we never have. So come and take it. Rethak stared at the message for a long moment, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he processed what he was reading. Then he began to laugh. A harsh barking sound that echoed through the bridge. They threaten us, he announced to his officers. These primitives who still burn dead plants for fuel actually threatened the Kethvari Dominion. His second in command, a scarred veteran named Kethos, moved to stand beside him. Shall I begin orbital bombardment? Supreme Commander, Rethak shook his massive head. No, that would be too quick. And I want the galaxy to see what happens to species that defy us. So we will conquer them the old way, with soldiers on the ground. And we will make them watch as we take everything they have. Within hours, Kethvari dropships began descending through Earth's atmosphere. They targeted the major population centers first, expecting to round up terrified civilians who would be too shocked to resist. The first dropship landed in a city called Moscow, and 300 Kethvari warriors emerged with weapons ready, their scaled bodies towering over the humans who stood watching from the windows of nearby buildings. The squad leader activated his translator and broadcast a message to the surrounding area. Humans of this settlement, you will gather in the central square and await processing, and any who resist will be executed as an example to the others. For a moment, nothing happened. Then an old woman stepped out of a doorway less than 50 meters away, and she was holding something in her hands. The squad leader barely had time to recognize it as a primitive projectile weapon before the shot took him through his left eye and exploded out the back of his skull. The street erupted into chaos. Humans poured from every building, every alley, every doorway, and they carried weapons of every kind imaginable, hunting rifles that had hung above fireplaces for generations, kitchen knives sharpened to razor edges, metal pipes and wooden clubs and bottles filled with burning liquid. The Kethvari warriors opened fire with their plasma weapons, and humans died by the dozens. But for every one that fell, 3 more seemed to appear an hour later. The dropship stood empty and burning in the middle of the street, and not a single Kethvari soldier remained alive. Reports began flooding back to the Eternal Conquest, and each one was worse than the last. In a place called Lagos, Kethvari soldiers had been lured into narrow streets and buried under collapsing buildings that the humans had rigged to foul in snow polo. Warriors had advanced into what they thought was an abandoned district, only to find themselves surrounded by thousands of civilians who attacked from every direction at once. In Mumbai, a single human had driven a vehicle loaded with explosives directly into a Kethvari command post, destroying himself and 40 enemy soldiers. In a single moment, Rethak stared at the casualty reports and felt something he had not experienced in centuries of warfare. He felt the first cold touch of doubt. They are not soldiers, Kethos said quietly, studying the same reports. The ones fighting us are not military forces at all. Then what are they? Rethak demanded. Dithis turned to face him, and for the first time in their long association, the veteran warrior looked uncertain. They are everyone, Supreme Commander, and the old and the young and the males and the females. And they are not fighting like a species that wants to survive. He paused, searching for the right words. They are fighting like a species that has decided we are not permitted to exist on their world. And they do not seem to care how many of them die to make that happen. Rethak turned back to the viewport and watched the planet below, where tiny flashes of light marked ongoing battles across every continent. He Had expected fear and submission, he had found something else entirely, and somewhere deep in his warrior's instincts. A voice whispered that he had made a terrible mistake. The nature of humanity, the Galactic Concord had been observing the invasion of Earth with mild interest ever since it began. High Arbiter Voshthil had even authorized a betting pool among the council members, and the odds heavily favored a complete Kethvori victory within 3 standard days, after 6 weeks. No one was laughing anymore. The observation probes that the Concord had placed in Earth's system transmitted constant updates, and what they showed defied every model the analysts had ever developed for. Predicting warfare outcomes to Kethvori had landed with overwhelming force and superior technology and the confidence of a species that had never lost a ground campaign. They were losing not quickly and not cleanly, but slowly and steadily. They were being ground down by a species that should have collapsed under the first assault. Voshthil sat in his private chamber and reviewed the latest intelligence reports, his mandibles clicking in a pattern that indicated deep confusion. "Explain this to me," he said to his chief analyst, a young Velthari who had been studying humanity since first contact. "The Kethvori have killed millions of humans, and their cities are burning, and their infrastructure is collapsing. So why are they not surrendering?" The analyst's crystalline body pulsed with uncertain light. "We have been trying to understand that ourselves, High Arbiter, and the answer appears to be that humans do not respond to overwhelming force the way other species do. All species respond to overwhelming force eventually," Voshthil insisted. "It is a fundamental survival instinct, and when faced with certain destruction, any rational being will choose submission over extinction." "That is precisely the problem," the analyst replied. "Humans are not choosing between submission and extinction, because in their minds, those two options are the same thing." The analyst activated a holographic display that showed scenes from across Earth in one image. A group of human children were being evacuated through underground tunnels, while their parents remained above to fight and die in another. Factory workers who had been producing consumer goods just weeks before were now assembling weapons around the clock, sleeping in shifts beside their machines in a third. An elderly human was teaching younger ones how to construct explosive devices from common household materials, and she was smiling as she did it. "We made an error in our initial assessment," the analyst continued. "When we observed humanity's history of internal conflict, we assumed it indicated a primitive and undisciplined species that would collapse under external pressure. And what do you believe now?" Voshthil asked. The analyst was quiet for a moment before responding. "We believe that humanity's history of conflict was not a weakness, but rather the longest and most intensive military training program any species has ever conducted." Voshthil mandibles stopped clicking. "Explain." "Every generation of humans has known war, High Arbiter, and every single one, going back 100,000 years to their earliest ancestors. And they have spent that entire time fighting and dying and learning and adapting." The display shifted to show human historical records, images of ancient battles and medieval sieges and modern wars that had consumed entire continents. They developed infantry tactics and cavalry charges and artillery bombardments. And then they developed tanks and aircraft and nuclear weapons. And each new form of warfare was studied and refined and passed down to the next generation. Many species have histories of conflict, Voshthil pointed out. "Not like this," the analyst insisted. "Other species fight wars and then recover, and they have periods of peace that last for thousands or millions of years. But humans have never had that." The display showed a timeline of human history with conflicts marked in red. There was almost no gap between them. They average approximately one major war per generation. And that means every single human alive today is descended from warriors. who survived conflicts that killed millions of their kind. And their entire civilization is built on a foundation of military experience that no other species can match. Voshthal studied the timeline in silence. Their museums are filled with weapons, the analyst continued. Their greatest literature glorifies sacrifice and battle. And their children play games that simulate warfare before they can even read. And they tell stories about heroes who died fighting against impossible odds. They romanticize death in combat. They romanticize victory through any means necessary. And death is simply a price they are willing to pay. The display shifted again to show current battlefield footage from Earth-human soldiers who were engaging HFY warriors in close combat. And many of them were dying, but they kept coming and kept fighting and kept finding new ways to kill their enemies. The HFY expected them to break. The analyst said quietly. They expected the humans to see their dead and lose the will to fight. But they do not understand what they are facing. And what are they facing? Analyst's crystalline form pulsed with an emotion then. Voshthal could not identify. They are facing a species that has been preparing for exactly this moment. For 100,000 years, High Arbiter, and the humans did not know they were preparing. And they did not know what they were preparing for. But every war they fought against each other was training for the day when they would face a true external enemy. The analyst paused. The HFY believe they are fighting a primitive species that stumbled into space too early. But the truth is far more dangerous. What truth? Humanity is not a peaceful species that occasionally fights wars. High Arbiter, and they are a warrior species that occasionally manages peace. And now that they have found an enemy worthy of their full attention, they are remembering what they truly are. Voshthal sat in silence for a long time after the analyst departed. He thought about the council session 18 months ago. When he and the other delegates had laughed at the human ambassador, he thought about how small and fragile she had looked, standing alone in that great chamber, and he wondered if perhaps they had made a very serious mistake. The tide-turned Supreme Commander Redax had stopped sleeping 6 weeks into what should have been a simple conquest. His ground forces had suffered 40% casualties, and the humans showed no signs of weakening. Every day brought new reports of ambush and sabotage and suicide attacks that killed dozens of his warriors at a time. His soldiers had begun to fear the darkness, because that was when the humans came, slipping through shadows like ghosts to cut throats, and plant explosives and vanish before anyone could respond. But the true nightmare began when the humans stopped merely defending and started attacking. Admiral Sarah Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance and watched the tactical display with calm, dark eyes. Her fleet consisted of 40 ships, each one built in the last 6 weeks from salvaged HFY technology and human engineering genius. Against her were 180 enemy vessels, each one larger and more powerful than anything humanity had ever constructed before the invasion. The odds were impossible, she smiled. All ships. This is Admiral Okonkwo, she said into the fleet-wide channel. You all know why we are here, and you all know what the enemy did to our world. So I will not waste time with speeches. She paused and looked around her bridge at the men and women who had volunteered for this mission, knowing they might not survive. We are going to show these invaders what happens when you laugh at humanity. And we are going to make them regret every moment they spent on our soil. And we are going to send a message that the entire galaxy will hear. Her voice hardened. No retreat. No surrender. No mercy. And for Earth. The channel erupted with voices repeating her words. 40 ships crying out as one. For Earth. The human fleet surged forward, and the HFY moved to intercept. Confident in their superior numbers and firepower, what followed would be studied by military analysts across the galaxy for centuries. The humans did not fight like any species the HFY had ever encountered. Their ships moved in patterns that seemed chaotic but created overlapping fields of fire that caught enemy vessels in crossfires from multiple angles. When a human ship was damaged beyond repair, its crew did not abandon it but instead aimed it at the nearest enemy and accelerated to maximum speed. Rethx watched from his flagship as the humans rammed 3 of his destroyers in the first 10 minutes of combat, each collision destroying both vessels in a blinding flash of energy. "They are insane," Kathos said beside him. And for the first time in their long service together, the veteran warriors sounded afraid. No rational species wastes ships and crews like this. "They're not wasting them," Rethax replied quietly. "They are trading them, and they consider the exchange favorable." The battle raged for 14 hours. Human ships darted through the HFY formation, striking at weak points and then withdrawing before the larger vessels could bring their weapons to bear. Pilots who ran out of ammunition resorted to ramming attacks. Engineers who could not repair their ships rigged them to explode and then guided them into enemy engine room. Soldiers who were too wounded to fight crawled to airlocks and threw themselves at passing HFY vessels, detonating the grenades strapped to their bodies against enemy hulls. By the time the HFY fleet began to withdraw, only 23 of their ships remained operational. The humans had lost 32 of their 40 vessels, but they had one. Rethax stood on the bridge of the Eternal Conquest and watched his remaining ships flee toward open space. And he knew that his career, and probably his life, were finished. The Dominion did not tolerate failure before he could order the jump to faster than light speed. A communication came through from the human flagship. Admiral Okonkwo appeared on his view screen, her face streaked with blood from a wound on her forehead, her uniform torn and burned, her ship clearly falling apart around her. But she was smiling. "Supreme Commander Rethax," she said, and her voice was calm despite the chaos visible behind her. "You came to our world expecting easy prey, and you found something else entirely." Rethax said nothing. "Run back to your Dominion and tell them what happened here. And tell them what we did to your fleet with ships we built in 6 weeks. And tell them to imagine what we will do with ships we build in 6 years." She leaned forward. "And tell them that if any HFY vessel ever enters our system again, we will not stop at defending ourselves, and we will come for your homeworld. And we will teach you the same lessons you tried to teach us." The transmission ended. Rethax ordered the jump to FTL and fled the Sol system, and as his ship vanished into the void, he composed a message that he would broadcast to every species with the capability to receive it. "Do not engage the humans." The message read, "They are not a prey species, and they are apex predators who forgot what they were. And now they remember, back on Earth." Admiral Okonkwo watched the last enemy ships disappear and allowed herself a moment of exhaustion. Then she turned to her surviving crew. "Get me a damage report, and start rescue operations for any escape pods in the area. And then contact Earth Command and tell them to start building more ships." "How many ships?" "Admiral," her first officer Asketa Okonkwo looked out at the stars. "All of them." The galaxy remembers the Galactic Concord had not held an emergency session in over 10,000 years. High Arbiter Voshthal looked around the council chamber at the representatives of the 12 most powerful species in the galaxy and saw something he had never seen before in all his centuries of leadership. He saw fear. "The situation is unprecedented," he began, his voice echoing through the vast space. "A protected nature-preserved species has defeated a major military power in open combat. And the implications of this are something we must address immediately." The Kreth representative slammed his claw against his seat. "The HFY were fools who underestimated their enemy, and their failure means nothing. Their failure means everything, the Valkyrie Collective responded, their crystalline voices ringing with unusual urgency. We have analyzed the data from the conflict, and what we have found is deeply troubling. A holographic display activated at the center of the chamber, showing graphs and statistics and images from the human war. Human industrial output increased during the invasion. The collective continued, while they were being bombed and attacked and killed by the millions. Their factories produced more than they had in peacetime, not less. The display shifted to show psychological assessments. Their population showed no signs of collapse under pressure, and their morale actually improved as the conflict intensified. And their soldiers displayed loyalty metrics that exceed even hive mind species like ourselves. What are you saying? The Syndicate of Oz demanded. We are saying that humans are not like other species, the collective replied. They do not break under pressure, and instead they become harder and stronger and more dangerous. And the more you hurt them, the more determined they become. Vostol raised one hand for silence. There is more concerning news. And our intelligence networks report that Earth has begun a massive shipbuilding program. The display changed to show orbital construction facilities that had not existed 6 months ago. They currently have 200 operational warships, with 500 more under construction, and based on their current rate of production, they will have a fleet of over 1,000 vessels. Within 2 standard years, the chamber fell silent. 1,000 warships built by a species that had proven it would trade 10 of its own ships to destroy one enemy vessel. 1,000 warships crewed by beings who considered death in battle to be a noble end. Rather than a failure, what do they want? The Kreth representative asked, and his voice had lost its earlier bravado. I believe we are about to find out. Vashto replied. The great doors of the chamber swung open. And Ambassador Chen Wei walked in. She was not alone this time. Behind her came a delegation of 20 humans, military officers and scientists and diplomats, all of them walking with the quiet confidence of people who knew their worth. Chen Wei stopped at the same platform where she had stood 18 months ago, in the same spot where alien delegates had mocked her species and laughed at her application. She looked around the chamber and allowed the silence to stretch. Honored members of the Council of 12 Stars, she began, and her voice was calm and controlled. We have not come to apply for membership. She paused. We have come to inform you that humanity is now a spacefaring power, and we expect to be treated as such. Vashto leaned forward. Ambassador Chen, perhaps we could discuss terms for your integration into the Concord. And there are established protocols for new member species that... No, Chen Wei interrupted, and the word echoed through the chamber like a gunshot. The council members stirred in their seats, unused to being interrupted by anyone. You called us primitive, Chen Wei continued. You laughed at our history of conflict and dismissed us as clever animals playing with fire. And you designated our world as a nature preserve because you thought we were too insignificant to matter. She activated a holographic display of her own, showing Earth's new fleet in formation above the planet. We lost 18 million people in the Kethvori invasion, and we will mourn them for as long as humanity exists. And we will never forget what was done to us. Her voice hardened. But we will also never forget who abandoned us. And we will never forget who watched from a safe distance while our cities burned. And we will never forget that we faced annihilation alone because you decided we were not worthy of help. The Syndicate of Oz representative spoke. The Concord does not interfere in conflicts involving non-member species. And that has been our policy for... I do not care about your policies, Chen Wei said, cutting them off. I care about results. And the result of your policies was that my people had to save themselves while the rest of the galaxy did nothing. She took a step forward. So here is what is going to happen now. And you are going to recognize humanity as a sovereign power with full rights under galactic law. And you are going to remove the nature preserve designation from our world. And you are going to treat us as equals from this moment forward. And if we refuse the Crest representative, demanded Chen Wei smiled, and there was no warmth in it, then we will assume that the Concord is hostile to human interests, and we will act accordingly. And you can ask the Cathfrey what happens. When humanity decides that someone is an enemy, the chamber was utterly silent. High Arbiter Vosh Thale looked around at his fellow council members and saw the same calculation happening behind every set of alien eyes. The humans were not bluffing. They had proven what they were capable of against the Cathfrey, and they were clearly willing to do the same to anyone else who threatened them. We will vote. Loshthal announced. The vote took less than 30 seconds. 12 in favor, 0 against. Humanity is recognized as a sovereign power with full rights under galactic law, Voshthal said. And the words seemed to cost him something. The nature preserve designation is removed, and Earth will be treated as an equal member of the galactic community. Chen Wei nodded. That is acceptable. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back over her shoulder. One more thing, High Arbiter, and I want you to remember this in the years to come, because we have been fighting since we climbed down from the trees, and we have so much practice. She held his gaze. Do not make us use it. She walked out of the chamber, and her delegation followed, and the doors sealed behind them. High Arbiter Voshthal sat in silence for a long time. After they left, he thought about the laughing that had filled this chamber 18 months ago. No one was laughing now, and deep in his ancient bones, he suspected that no one would ever laugh at humanity again 3 decades later. When the Void Swarm emerged from dark space and began consuming entire civilizations, the Galactic Concord did not waste time debating what to do. They sent a message to Earth, just 4 words long. Humanity, we need you. And humanity smiled. They had been waiting.